Hey mama, have you ever left a therapy session feeling like you forgot to say the most important thing? Do you wonder if therapy is actually helping or if you're somehow doing it quote unquote wrong? And what if just a few simple changes before and during your next appointment could completely transform the way therapy works for you? In today's episode, we're talking about 4 secrets of postpartum depression therapy that can help you get so much more out of every single session. If you're seeing a therapist for postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, or another postpartum mood disorder, I want to share some practical tips that can help you walk through your next appointment feeling more prepared, more confident, and more hopeful. Do you want practical steps to rein in the overwhelm and start feeling like yourself again, but struggle with feeling hopeless, unsupported, and misunderstood? If so, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Stephanie, wife, mom of 4, and a 2-time acute postpartum depression survivor. I learned the secrets of how to overcome the feeling of drowning and fully thrive as a new mom through life-giving hope and support. If you're ready for validation, encouragement, and those easy practical tips, then take a deep breath in, exhale, and we'll take the first steps together. Here we go. Did you know that I have a free community of mamas just like you, new moms who are struggling to survive, much less thrive, and are looking for hope, encouragement, and validation? We share life together. There's a short weekly devotion, encouraging quotes, and so much more. There's even chances to win free coffee and prizes. Come join us at bit.ly/PPD support group. PPD is capitalized, and you can always find the link to this group in my show notes. I want to take you back to a season in my life when I was really struggling with postpartum depression. I remember just sitting in my therapist's office and her asking me the question that therapists ask about 1,000,000 times. So Stephanie, how have things been this week? And my mind would just go completely blank. And I do mean completely blank. Because the truth was, things had not been okay. I had spent the entire week crying. I was dealing with intrusive thoughts. I was terrified to be alone. I wasn't sleeping. I was anxious. I was overwhelmed. And honestly, I felt like I was still barely surviving. And yet somehow, when I was sitting there in that quiet office with somebody who was actually there to help me, all I could come up with in that moment, and I kid you not, is, I guess it's been okay. And I'd nod. Maybe I'd say a few more words. And then we'd talk for a little while, and eventually the appointment would be over. I'd walk out, get in my car, buckle my seatbelt, and almost immediately remember everything I had forgotten to say. Oh my gosh, I forgot to tell her about that one panic attack. I forgot to tell her I haven't even been sleeping. I never mentioned those thoughts I've been having. And I would sit in that parking lot after one of those appointments just crying my eyes out because I felt like I had completely wasted the hour. And insurance or not, therapy's not cheap. I was paying for it. I had finally gotten myself there. I had someone sitting across from me who was trained to help me. Trained in actual postpartum mental health mood disorders, mind you. And I had spent the entire appointment saying essentially to her, I'm fine. At the time, I remember wondering if maybe therapy just wasn't working for me. But looking back, I can see that therapy wasn't the problem. I just didn't know how to use therapy. And I don't mean that in a way that puts the responsibility for healing on myself or on you. But the therapist is responsible for bringing their education, their experience and training, and their professional expertise into that room. You bring something they can't possibly know unless you tell them, because you bring you. You bring what happened this week. You bring the thoughts that scared the mess out of you. You bring the moments when you completely lost it. You bring the thoughts you're embarrassed about, and you bring the things that actually make you feel a little better. You bring the questions. And the more of that you bring into the room, the more your therapist has to work with. So today I want to give you 4 things that completely change the way I approach therapy. And if you're currently seeing a therapist for postpartum depression or anxiety, I really want you to try these. Because if you're going to spend the time, energy, and most likely money going to therapy, I want you to get as much out of those sessions as you possibly can. And the first thing is incredibly simple. Stop trying to remember everything. Just write it down. Honestly, I have a notes app on my phone, that's titled therapy, and throughout the week I write down everything. It doesn't mean I tell her everything on that list, but I write it all down. And then before I go, I review the list, take off what I don't think is pertinent anymore, and then we talk about it. That's just how I do it. But yeah, stop trying to remember everything. Write it down. I wish someone had told me this when I was in the thick of postpartum depression, because your brain is not operating under normal circumstances, mama. You are exhausted. You are probably truly sleep deprived. You're anxious, emotional, you're thinking about the baby, thinking about feeding, thinking about diapers, and you're thinking about whether you remembered to put the laundry in the dryer or to tell your husband to, in my case, because I hate doing laundry. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you're supposed to remember exactly what happened on Tuesday at 2:15 in the afternoon that made you feel like you were losing your ever-loving mind. Good luck with that. Seriously. There were so many times when I would walk into therapy thinking, I have so much to tell her. And then she'd ask me how I was doing, and I had nothing. It was like somebody had erased the entire week from my brain. Maybe I had a panic attack on Monday. Maybe Wednesday I cried for 3 hours. Maybe Thursday I had a huge argument with my husband because I was overwhelmed and couldn't take one more thing, even though it had nothing to do with him or wasn't his fault. And maybe Friday, I actually had a really good afternoon and thought, wait, maybe I'm getting a little better. Then I would show up to therapy the following Tuesday, and she would ask, Stephanie, how was your week? And I would literally say, fine. The word fine. But it wasn't fine. My brain was just tired. So here's what I want you to do. Open that notes app on your phone. Get a fancy journal if you want one, but it's not necessary. You don't need some elaborate tracking system. Just create a note or a list called Things to Tell My Therapist. And throughout the week, whenever something happens, put it on there. I'm going to give you some examples from my own list because I still have it. Maybe you write, had a panic attack today. Maybe you write, really struggled getting out of bed. Had a surprisingly good afternoon. Got really angry at my husband, and I'm not sure why. That's in there more than once. I've been having this thought over and over. I have no idea why, but today felt easier. And don't just write down the bad stuff. Write down the wins too, mama. Because sometimes when we're depressed, we don't notice our progress, even if it's tiny. We remember the horrible day. We forget the good hour. We remember the panic attack, but we forget that we actually used a coping skill afterwards. So write it all down. Give yourself grace, give yourself credit, but be honest. Then, when you walk into your therapist office, you don't have to rely on your postpartum brain to remember your entire week. You could do what I did and literally just pull out your phone and say, okay, I made a list. That one little change can make a huge difference. And the second thing, something I've said again and again, tell the truth. I know. It is easier said than done, but this one matters so much, especially once you have a therapist you really trust. And it can take some time to find one and to connect with one. Trust me, I know. But I think one of the hardest parts of postpartum depression is that we become really good at editing ourselves. We tell people the parts that feel safe. Like, we say we're tired or we're overwhelmed. We're having a really hard time adjusting. And sometimes we leave out the parts that scare us the most. I know I did. So maybe you're having intrusive thoughts and they absolutely terrify you. I've been there. Maybe you're feeling hopeless. Maybe you're having anxiety so intense that you don't want to be left alone. Maybe you're angry in a way that doesn't feel like you. Maybe you don't feel connected to your baby in the way you thought you would. And you don't tell your therapist because you're afraid of what they'll think. Or you're afraid that they'll think you're a bad mom. Or you're afraid they'll judge you. Or you're afraid that once you say it out loud, everything suddenly becomes much more serious. And mama, I understand that fear. I really do. But here's the thing. Your therapist can't help you with the parts of your experience that they don't know about. And if something feels too scary or embarrassing to say, you can start there. You can literally walk into your appointment and say, before she asks a question, you walk in that door, the door closes behind you. There's something I need to tell you, but I'm really scared to say it. That's a sentence. That's enough to open the door to a conversation. And if saying it out loud feels impossible, write it down and hand your therapist the phone or give them that piece of paper. I've done it. Put it in an email if it's something your therapist practice allows and it feels appropriate. You don't have to make it sound pretty. You do not have to explain it perfectly. You just need to communicate what is happening. And especially when you're experiencing intrusive thoughts, please don't keep them to yourself simply because you're afraid of what they mean. Don't make the mistake I've made. Intrusive thoughts can be incredibly frightening, and a qualified mental health professional, please understand this at this moment, I do mean a qualified mental health professional, 100% someone who's qualified in postpartum mental health issues, because if you don't have someone who truly understands that postpartum period, it is different than any other type of mental health issue you will ever have in your life, or that anyone you know can tell you about that they've had, okay? You need someone who is trained. Intrusive thoughts can be really frightening, and a qualified mental health professional can help you understand what you're experiencing, assess your safety, and determine what kind of support you need. You don't have to sit there all alone thinking, what is wrong with me? Tell someone, and then let them do their job by helping you understand it. And that brings me to the third thing I want you to remember. Ask questions. This one sounds so obvious, but I think we do forget it. Your therapist is the professional in the room with all the experience, and she's got the experience of working with other people too. While she can't tell you their names or their exact stories, all of that goes into how she treats you. She's the professional, but that does not mean you have to sit there quietly nodding your head like you understand everything they say. You don't. I didn't. And that's okay. If your therapist teaches you a grounding technique and you're thinking, okay, but what does that actually mean? Ask. For example, they give you a coping strategy and you're thinking, what exactly am I supposed to do with this? I have a newborn. Or when am I supposed to do this? Ask them. If they use a term you've never heard before, ask. You can say, can you explain that another way? What does that look like in real life? Can we practice that together? Or what am I supposed to do when this happens at 2 o'clock in the morning? And I love that last question because sometimes coping skills sound all nice and beautifully packaged and wonderful when you're sitting in a quiet therapy office at 10 o'clock in the morning. But then you go home and your baby is crying, you're exhausted, your husband is asleep, it's 2 a.m., and suddenly you're like, okay, therapist, now what? That's exactly why you should practice the skills before you leave. That is one thing I learned to do, and it has changed everything. If your therapist teaches you grounding, ask them to walk you through it. If they teach you breathing, practice it right then and there with them. If they're helping you challenge negative thoughts, work through a real thought together, or better, work through 3 or 4 real thoughts together. Don't just nod and say, okay. Make sure you actually understand what you're being taught, because the goal isn't to collect coping skills. The goal is to have real tools in your tool belt that you can actually use when life gets hard. And finally, this may be the biggest one of all. Remember that therapy doesn't only happen inside the therapist's office. I used to think the appointment was the healing. I'd go to therapy, I would talk, I would cry, I would leave. And then I'd wait until the next appointment. But therapy is really more like physical therapy. If you hurt your knee and you go to therapy once a week, you don't expect your knee to magically become strong because you showed up for the appointment. Your physical therapist gives you exercises, and then you go home and practice them. Your muscles get stronger through repetition, and emotional healing can work in a similar way. So your therapist may teach you how to challenge a negative thought. Then Tuesday afternoon, you hear yourself thinking, I'm a terrible mom. And instead of immediately believing it, you stop. You remember what you talked about in therapy. You ask yourself, is that really true? What evidence do I have for that thought? What would I say to a friend who was talking about herself this way? Maybe you don't completely change the thought. Maybe you don't suddenly feel amazing, but you paused, you noticed it, you practice something different, and that is progress. That's therapy working outside the office. And that's why I want you to start looking for the small changes. Maybe you recover from a hard moment a little faster. Maybe you recognize a trigger a little sooner. Maybe you ask for help instead of pretending you're fine. Maybe you catch yourself believing a negative thought and challenge it. Or maybe you have one afternoon where you actually enjoy your baby and being a mom. Don't overlook those things, mama, because healing from postpartum depression usually isn't one giant moment where you wake up and suddenly say, oh my gosh, I'm completely better. It's usually much quieter than that. It's one small change, then another, then they come faster, and eventually you look back and realize, wait, I'm different. I'm not where I was. I'm actually getting better. So if you're in therapy right now, here's what I want you to remember. Don't make your exhausted brain responsible for remembering everything. Write it down. Don't give your therapist the polished version of your week. Tell her the truth, or him. Don't sit quietly because you're afraid your question is silly. Always ask questions. And don't assume that healing only happens during your therapy appointment. Please take what you're learning into the rest of your week and practice it. And mama, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm in therapy, but I don't think it's working, I just want to encourage you not to immediately give up. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to stay with the exact same therapist or treatment forever. Sometimes you need a different approach. Sometimes you need a different therapist. And sometimes you need additional support to therapy. But before you decide that therapy itself isn't helping, ask yourself, am I bringing the whole truth into the room? Am I asking questions? Am I practicing what I'm learning between appointments? And if you're doing all of that and still don't feel like you're making progress, that's something worth talking about with your therapist or another qualified professional, because you deserve care that actually helps you. And if you're listening to this right now and you're not in therapy, maybe this episode is your little nudge. You don't have to know exactly what kind of therapist you need, and you don't have to have everything figured out. You can simply start by saying, I think I'm struggling with postpartum depression and I need some help. That's enough. And mama, if you're already going to therapy, I want you to give yourself credit for that. Seriously. The fact that you're showing up says something. It says that some part of you still believes things can get better, even if it's a tiny part. Even if you're exhausted, even if you don't feel hopeful yet, you're showing up. And I want you to remember that healing doesn't always feel hopeful while it's happening. Oh, trust me. Sometimes healing looks like crying in a therapist's office. And I hate crying in front of people. Sometimes it looks like admitting what you've been hiding. And it's hard for me to do that. Sometimes it looks like learning the same coping skill over and over until eventually you actually remember to use it. And sometimes it looks like taking one tiny step forward and then having a really terrible day. But that doesn't mean you're back at the beginning. It means you're human. So keep going, keep talking, keep asking questions, keep telling the truth, and keep taking those tiny steps forward. Because one day, you may look back at the version of yourself sitting in that therapist office and realize just how far you've come. I know, because I've lived it. I know what it feels like to be in that dark place and wonder if you're ever going to feel normal again. And I also know what it feels like to eventually look around and realize, I'm okay. I'm here. I'm myself again. So if you're in that place right now, please don't give up. You don't need to have the perfect therapy session. You don't need to have everything perfectly. You don't need to always love your therapist. You don't need to figure out your entire healing journey today. Just keep showing up. One honest conversation, one question, one coping skill that works or not. Try it anyway. If it doesn't work, round up and try another one next week. One tiny step and then another. There is hope, mama, and I am living proof of that. And before you go, don't forget to come join us in my private Facebook group, Overcoming Postpartum Depression Support Group, at bit.ly/PPD Support Group. Remember, the PPD is capitalized. It's also going to be in my show notes. It's a link where you can connect with other moms who understand what you're walking through and where you don't have to pretend that everything is okay. And if this episode brought up difficult thoughts or feelings for you, please reach out to your therapist, doctor, or another qualified mental health professional for support. You can also contact Postpartum Support International at 1-800-944-4773 via call or text for postpartum mental health support and resources, or visit them online at postpartum.net. And if you are ever in immediate danger or believe you may act on thoughts of harming yourself or someone else, please call 911 or go to your nearest emergency room. You don't have to do this alone, mama.
Hi, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of my mom's show. If so, would you take 30 seconds and share it with a mom friend who may be struggling to feel like herself and is in need of some encouragement today?
Also, please leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. It blesses my mom's heart to know this podcast is helping you.
Okay, time to go change a diaper and do the school run. I'll meet you back in a few days for another episode.
Take care.